And in business, there is always choices to be made, especially when it comes to shipping. One of the most important decisions we have to make is whether we are going with ocean freight or air freight. Number one, sudden changes in existing contracts or orders. Number two, new contracts or orders under new terms. For an example, if a buyer requests the exporter, or we call it as seller, to make a change to pending order from air to sea freight, or to advance some of the month-end orders from sea to air freight. And then we also have a request for change of payment terms from DP side to DA 120 days, from either airway bill or from bill of lading date. In this situation, and because of the current global crisis, a seller really don't want to be negative to buyer's requests. But then again, the seller should take maximum precautions before he accepts the changes. Number one is the contract. An exporter should check the contract against the buyer's request. Stick to the basics: the right quality, quantity, timely delivery, and of course, timely receipt of payment. To make a clean transaction, it is important that both buyer and seller meet the contractual obligations, and it is the exporter's responsibility to make sure that all the changes are included in the contract prior to planning of the shipment. One thing to keep in mind is that because of the current global situation, there is a high risk of defaulting on payments. And it is always a smart thing to look for additional protections. As the seller, you should explore all the options of having these risks covered by tools like customized export credit insurance policies, which is available for all small, medium, and large companies. This helps exporters to stay safe against non-receipt or delayed receipt of payments, insolvency, or non-acceptance, and so on and so forth. Second thing to consider is the cost model and the price forecast. Both the buyer and seller should definitely agree on all cost changes and be comfortable with any price forecast changes before going ahead with implementing the change in business transactions. One common understanding is that shipping by sea is always cheaper than air. This can be true up to an extent, but you also have to understand that it's a bit more complicated looking at the full cycle. For example, airlines charge by gross weight or by volume weight. So you have to calculate the cost by weight and the size of the shipment. Whereas sea carriers charge per cubic meter or for full container. And on top of this, there is also destination fees and charges. So sea freight costs are cheaper, but you have to consider the other costs like origin, destination storage charges, handling charges, and so on, which may be many times more expensive than just the shipping freight cost. In terms of air, although the air freight rates are expensive, the origin destination charges would be low. So compare both end to end before taking a decision. Next is contract lead times, management of temperature control cargo. Now this is something you really must pay attention to. Time is money. There is no question that air freight is faster. Shipments take about a day or two, whereas by sea it will take about a month or so to arrive at destination. So most businesses would opt for air. Now when it comes to sea shipments, because it takes a long time during the voyage, you should give special attention to the kind of cargo that you ship and see whether your cargo needs special temperature control containers. Picking the right reefer container is critical, especially for some products that need cold chain management. These products need special environment for storage, container plug-in facilities, handling during transport from point A to point B. We call this handling the cold chain management end to end. So keep that in mind to consider all factors. Fourth point to keep in mind is Incoterm change according to the transport mode. Contracts should always mention the correct Incoterm. Unfortunately, what happens is, in most contracts, we don't say the proper Incoterm stated. You can get into real trouble, really into deep waters, if you mention the wrong Incoterm. And things can get messy when there's a dispute. For example, the most common Incoterms like FOB, CFR and CIF are exclusively for water-based transport, while FCA, CPT and CIP are used for multimodal transport. But we see so many people or organizations using FOB instead of FCA for multimodal transport and for containerized shipments. Therefore, we recommend buyers using FCA instead of FOB for containerized cargo and CPT for sellers because it gives you better control on your cargo. So take a look at the ICC New Incoterms 2020 rulebook to better understand your Incoterm. You can still use the Incoterm 2010 if you prefer, but keep in mind to specially mention the year along with the Incoterm. The final point to consider is insurance. Go ahead and take a good look at the difference between the existing policy and the new, according to the changes. See if all aspects of the air to sea or sea to air mode has been captured. Analyze the entire route. Identify the risks covered by the Incoterm and look for gaps. If in case there is a possibility of an open risk, make sure you cover that with additional policies. Also, keep in mind that according to the latest Incoterm 2020, CIP requires insurance cover compliant Institute Cargo Clause A, whereas CIF remains the same with Institute Cargo Clause C. Again, it is important that you go through the ICC New Incoterm 2020 rulebook for details. Buyer and seller should really understand the risk levels according to the type of the cargo and whether it requires special temperature control environments like reefers. And if you require special conditions, you should make it a point to have a separate discussion with the carriers before including them into your insurance policy. Once everyone understands and agrees on their responsibilities, it's all a smooth sailing for your trade. Now, these are only a handful of tips to keep in mind, especially when it comes to changing of logistics and transport modes. For more information and assistance, make sure to visit TradeWatch.